Rural America. Its landscapes are vast, often silent. But sometimes, stories unfold out here that are truly stranger than fiction, tales of ambition, faith, and explosive conflict that can tear a community apart and rebuild it in ways nobody sees coming. This is one of those stories. It's about a tiny, unassuming town in Oregon, a place that, for a few wild years in the early 1980s, became ground zero for an international spiritual movement, a utopian dream, and a criminal enterprise that sent shockwaves across the nation. We're talking about Antelope, Oregon, and how a mysterious cult, with a charismatic guru and his fiercely devoted followers, didn't just show up, they took over. And in doing so, they changed this Oregon town forever. Picture this, a quiet little spot, home to maybe 40 people, where life just drifted along. Now imagine thousands of strangers, all dressed in shades of red and orange, suddenly descending on this piece. And their numbers just kept growing. These weren't tourists. They had a vision, to build their own city, a utopia, on a massive 64,000-acre ranch just down the road. What started as a spiritual dream, though, quickly spiraled. It became a battle for control, a culture clash so fierce it led to political warfare, the largest bioterrorism attack in U.S. history, and a bitter taste of mistrust that would hang in the air for decades. To really get what happened in Oregon, we first got to travel to India and meet a man named Chandra Mohan Jain. You might know him later as Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh, or eventually Osho. Born in 1931, Rajneesh started out as a philosophy professor, but his real passion was spiritual teaching. He hit the public speaking circuit in the late 50s, and by the 60s, his reputation as a charismatic, unconventional thinker was exploding. Rajneesh's teachings? A powerful mix of Eastern mysticism, Western psychology, and a pretty radical idea for the time: total personal freedom, emotional release, and embracing sensuality. He wasn't a fan of traditional religions, socialism, or social norms. Instead, he preached a life lived to the fullest, a blend of the spiritual and the material, something he sometimes called Zorba the Buddha. His philosophy was definitely unique. He pushed dynamic meditation, a method, often involving intense physical activity and emotional outbursts, designed to help people connect with the divine. He tossed out the old idea of asceticism, of giving up worldly pleasures. No, his neo-sannyasins, his followers, were encouraged to live in the world fully, just without getting too attached. They often wore those signature orange and red clothes, and many took on new names, new identities within the movement. Rajneesh's message really struck a chord with a lot of people, especially Westerners who felt let down by mainstream society and were looking for something different, a new kind of spirituality or community. His ashram in Pune, India, set up in 1974, became a global magnet for thousands of these seekers. He was famous for his progressive, and often controversial, views on sex. He advocated for free love and wasn't keen on marriage, seeing it as a social trap. This openness about sensuality, along with his habit of poking holes in established norms, definitely built his notoriety. The sex guru label? It stuck. But as his influence grew, so did the trouble. His unconventional ways led to increasing friction with Indian authorities. By the early 1980s, facing legal headaches and what they saw as official harassment, the movement started looking for a new home. They needed a place where their spiritual utopia could truly blossom, far from the hassles in India. The United States, with its promise of religious freedom, looked like the perfect spot. The hunt for this new promised land was largely driven by one of Bhagwan's most trusted, and frankly formidable, right-hand women, Ma Anand Sheela. Born Sheela Ambilal Patel in India, she rose to become Rajneesh's personal secretary and a powerhouse within the movement, basically its CEO. Her complete devotion to Bhagwan, combined with a razor-sharp mind and a fiercely pragmatic, often ruthless style, made her the engine behind the whole Oregon plan. In 1981, the Rajneesh movement, with Sheela leading the charge, made a huge move. For $5.75 million, they snapped up the Big Muddy Ranch, a sprawling 64,229-acre piece of land in remote Wasco County, Oregon. This wasn't just any old ranch. It was enormous, isolated, and to the Rajneeshis, it was a blank slate. Here, they would build their dream city, Rajneeshpuram. The name itself meant Rajneesh's village. Their public story, at least at first, was that they wanted to create a small agricultural community. The land was zoned for farming, and the initial plans they showed local officials reflected that. But the real dream? Much, much bigger. They envisioned a fully operational city, big enough for thousands of followers pouring in from all over the world to live and work by Bhagwan's teachings. This city would have everything, its own housing, businesses, farms, even an airport. It was meant to be a self-sufficient commune, a model for a whole new way of life. Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh himself landed in the U.S. in May 1981 on a tourist visa, supposedly for medical reasons. He, along with about 2,000 followers to start, moved on to the Oregon Ranch. Choosing Oregon and this very remote part of Wasco County seemed like a smart play for a group wanting to build their own world, far from prying eyes. But that very isolation and the sheer audacity of their plans would soon spark a massive escalating conflict with the small, established towns nearby, especially the tiny community of Antelope. The dream of Rajneeshpuram was about to slam headfirst into the reality of rural Oregon. Antelope, Oregon, back in 1981, was the kind of place you'd call sleepy. With a population that barely nudged 40 to 60 people, many of them retirees, it was where everyone knew your name and life moved at a slow, predictable pace. Tucked away in the vast dry landscape of Central Oregon, it was a town people valued for its quiet, its remoteness, and its old-fashioned way of life. It had history too, starting as a stop on a wagon road in the 1870s and officially becoming a town in 1901. For generations, it had just been a small, tight-knit ranching community. So the arrival of the Rajneeshis? That was, to put it mildly, a bombshell. It started subtly, with them buying the Big Muddy Ranch about 80 miles out. But pretty soon, Bhagwan's followers, easy to spot in their red, orange, and maroon clothes, started showing up not just on the ranch but right in Antelope itself. They began buying up property, lots and houses, within the town limits. How did Antelope's longtime residents react? At first, it was a mix of curiosity, maybe some head-scratching, and a growing sense of unease. These weren't just new neighbors. They represented a lifestyle, a belief system, that was completely alien to the conservative, traditional values of the folks already there. The Rajneeshis' communal living, their open attitudes about sex, and just the sheer number of them, it was all pretty alarming to the old-timers. The culture gap was massive. The locals, many elderly and having lived in Antelope their whole lives, cherished their peace, their privacy, their settled social order. The newcomers? They were seen as outsiders, city folk with strange habits and a baffling devotion to an Indian guru. Letters started circulating among the locals. Letters from families around the world whose relatives had joined the movement, often detailing huge sums of money given to the guru. This just deepened the suspicion and worry. The Rajneeshis, on their side, often looked at the locals as narrow-minded, resistant to anything new, maybe even bigoted. They were there to build a utopia, and they expected the freedom to do it. Ma Anand Sheela, as the movement's public face, often took a confrontational, dismissive stance against any opposition, which only threw gasoline on the fire. Antelope's tranquility was gone, shattered. The town that had been a quiet haven was suddenly on the front lines of a cultural and demographic earthquake. And it wasn't just about different lifestyles anymore. It was about the future of their town. As hundreds, then thousands, of Rajneeshis moved onto the ranch and started flexing their muscles in Antelope, the original residents felt like they were being swallowed whole. They were scared their little town was being systematically taken over. The stage was set for a bitter fight, a battle for the very soul of Antelope. While things were getting tense in Antelope, out on the massive Big Muddy Ranch, Rajneeshpuram was practically exploding out of the desert. The energy and sheer dedication of Bhagwan's followers were incredible. Thousands of sannyasins, many of them skilled professionals and highly educated people, threw their labor and money into building their city. In just a few years, what had been dry ranchland was transformed. They built roads, housing for thousands, a shopping mall, restaurants, meditation centers, an airstrip, and impressive farming operations. They even set up their own bus system, a police force, and schools. Rajneeshpuram became a buzzing, self-contained city, a real testament to the movement's organizational skills and the followers' devotion. Many worked incredibly long hours, but described the vibe as joyful, vibrant, like everyone was part of something huge. The Rajneeshis were actually ahead of their time in some ways, using organic farming methods and recycling programs. The whole community aimed to be self-sufficient, growing its own food and running its own businesses. And the money fueling all this? It was serious. It came from follower contributions and profits from Rajneesh businesses around the world, like publishing and therapy groups. Bhagwan himself lived pretty comfortably, famously amassing a fleet of dozens of Rolls-Royces, a powerful symbol of the movement's wealth and its embrace of materialism alongside spirituality. But all this rapid growth, and their plan to make Rajneeshpuram a legally recognized city, quickly hit legal and bureaucratic brick walls. Their initial claim of just being an agricultural commune was challenged as the true scale of their construction became obvious. Oregon has pretty strict land use laws, and the group found themselves tangled in legal fights with state and county authorities, and with groups like 1,000 Friends of Oregon, who argued the city broke these laws. The Rajneeshis insisted they were being unfairly targeted because of religious intolerance and xenophobia. The culture clashes with local Oregonians just got worse. Seeing thousands of red-clad sannyasins, their open displays of affection, and hearing about Bhagwan's controversial teachings on sex was deeply unsettling for many in the conservative rural area. The Rajneeshis, in turn, often looked down on the locals, seeing them as backward and obstacles to their enlightened path. The media, both local and national, swarmed to the drama, often painting the Rajneeshis in a sensational light, sometimes even comparing Rajneeshpuram to controversial groups like Jonestown. Ma Anand Sheela, as Bhagwan's spokesperson, became a media regular. She was known for her sharp tongue, her aggressive defense of the commune, and her often fiery statements. While some might have admired her strength, her combative style pushed many Oregonians further away and fed the growing idea that the Rajneeshis were arrogant and unwilling to bend. The dream of a peaceful utopia was getting buried under a reality of mistrust, hostility, and a deepening chasm between the newcomers and the longtime residents of Wasco County. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about power, control, and the very identity of the region. With legal challenges piling up against Rajneeshpuram's incorporation and expansion on the ranch, the Rajneeshis shifted their focus more deliberately toward a much easier target, the tiny, vulnerable town of Antelope. If they couldn't easily make their city on the ranch official, maybe they could grab control through existing political structures. Antelope, with its minuscule population, was the key. Their strategy was pretty straightforward: demographic and political takeover. Sannyasins started moving into Antelope in bigger numbers, buying up properties and registering to vote. The original residents, just a few dozen of them, quickly found themselves outnumbered. When the Rajneeshis started showing interest in local affairs, Like asking about open seats on the Antelope school board, the townspeople got deeply suspicious. They saw it as a clear move to seize control, especially since the Rajneeshis already had their own school on the ranch. The old-timers in Antelope, seriously alarmed and feeling their way of life slipping through their fingers, tried a desperate move. In April 1982, they held a vote to disincorporate their own town. The idea was, if Antelope stopped existing as a legal town, it couldn't be taken over. But by the time the vote happened, enough Rajneeshis had moved in, established residency, and registered to vote. The plan to disincorporate, it failed. Having blocked that attempt, the Rajneeshis pushed their advantage. In May 1982, the residents of the ranch voted to incorporate their own separate city of Rajneeshpuram right there on the ranch property. But the fight for Antelope wasn't over. With their bigger numbers, the Rajneeshis soon won control of the Antelope City Council. They started making changes that suited their own needs and vision, pushing the original inhabitants even further away. The final nail in the coffin for Old Antelope came on September 18, 1984. By a vote of 57 to 22, the town of Antelope officially changed its name to Rajneesh. The post office, the school, the very identity of the town that had stood for over a century, was now under the control of Bhagwan's followers. For the few original residents still hanging on, it was a devastating blow, a symbol of their complete loss of control. The takeover was technically legal, done through local democratic processes, but to many Oregonians, it felt like an aggressive invasion. The tiny town of Antelope, Oregon, had for all intents and purposes been wiped off the map, replaced by a town named after an Indian guru. And the stage was set for even more drastic and dangerous showdowns. The story of Rajneeshpuram and Antelope is such a tangled web of belief, ambition, and raw conflict. If you're finding this dive into how a mysterious cult rewrote an Oregon town's destiny compelling, why not hit that subscribe button and give us a like? It really helps us bring more in-depth stories like this to you. What do you think was the most jaw-dropping moment in this takeover? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Now let's get back to the escalating crisis in Wasco County. With Antelope politically captured, and Rajneeshpuram operating like a city despite ongoing legal fights over its status, the whole atmosphere in Wasco County got incredibly tense. Fear and hostility were thick in the air. The Rajneeshis weren't satisfied with just their own city and the conquered town. They had their eyes on influencing Wasco County politics as a whole. They started trying to get seats on county boards and commissions, which set off alarm bells for a much wider group of Oregonians. The commune itself started to look more like a fortress. The Peace Force, the Rajneeshi Police Department, became heavily armed. Reports were flying around that they had an arsenal including Uzi semi-automatic rifles, Galil assault rifles, and other powerful weapons. The commune leader said this buildup was for self-defense, claiming they were facing threats from hostile locals and possibly even government raids. There were even whispers that the National Guard might be called in to deal with the situation at Rajneeshpuram. A real siege mentality started to take hold within the commune's leadership. Ma Anand Sheela, especially, projected this image of absolute defiance. Her public statements got sharper, more confrontational, often laced with profanity and personal attacks on anyone who opposed them. This didn't exactly cool things down. It just poured fuel on the fire of animosity and fear on both sides. Local Oregonians felt intimidated by the cult's aggressive tactics, their money, their sheer numbers, and their growing stockpile of weapons. Stories of harassment and intimidation by Rajneeshis against their opponents started making the rounds. This wasn't just a series of legal squabbles or cultural misunderstandings anymore. It was turning into a cold war, with both sides dug in deep and deeply suspicious of each other. The Oregon Attorney General, Dave Frohnmeyer, was actively fighting the legality of Rajneeshpuram, arguing its incorporation violated the separation of church and state. The Rajneeshis, in turn, fired back with their own lawsuits against various individuals and groups. Adding to the already thick atmosphere of fear was an act of violence aimed directly at the Rajneeshis. In June 1983, the Rajneeshi-owned hotel in Portland, the Hotel Rajneesh, was bombed by an Islamist militant group, Jamaat al-Fuqra. While an outside group carried out this attack, it undoubtedly cranked up the paranoia and the feeling of being under siege within Rajneeshpuram, likely reinforcing their belief that they needed more security and control. Disillusioned followers also began to trickle out of the organization, sometimes facing harsh treatment from those who stayed. The utopian dream was showing some serious cracks, and the leadership, particularly Ma Anand Sheela, seemed ready to go to extreme lengths to protect their empire and achieve their goals, no matter the cost. You could almost feel it in the air, a sense that things were about to explode, that they were reaching a point of no return. As the Rajneeshis faced more and more opposition and legal roadblocks to their expansion and political dreams in Wasco County, some within the commune's leadership decided to escalate their tactics in a way that was truly horrifying. Their big goal? To gain political control of Wasco County in the November 1984 elections. And how did they plan to do it? By reducing the number of legitimate voters who would cast ballots against their candidates. Their method was sickening. Incapacitate the local population through bioterrorism. In September and October of 1984, members of the Rajneeshpuram leadership, with Ma Anand Sheela and a tight circle of her associates calling the shots, deliberately contaminated salad bars at 10 restaurants in the Dalles, the county seat of Wasco County. They used Salmonella enterica typhimurium bacteria, which they had actually grown in a lab inside Rajneeshpuram. The bacteria were sprinkled on salad greens and mixed into salad dressings, things people ate all the time. The results were devastating. A shocking 751 people got sick with salmonella poisoning. They suffered terribly with symptoms like diarrhea, vomiting, fever, and chills. 45 people had to be hospitalized because they were so ill. Miraculously, no one died, but the outbreak caused widespread panic and sickness all through the Dalles. It was, and still is, the largest bioterrorist attack in United States history. Before they hit the salad bars, there were even smaller-scale test runs. In August 1984, 2 Wasco County commissioners visiting Rajneeshpuram were given glasses of water laced with salmonella. Both got sick, and one ended up in the hospital. Reports also suggest the cult members spread salmonella on produce in grocery stores and on doorknobs and urinal handles in the county courthouse, though these attempts didn't cause the widespread illness they were hoping for. The motive behind this horrific act was purely political. By making a significant chunk of the voting population in the Dalles sick, the Rajneeshis hoped to suppress voter turnout. This, they figured, would allow their own candidates to win the local elections and seize control of the county government. But the plot ultimately blew up in their faces. Local residents, already deeply suspicious of the Rajneeshis, turned out in massive numbers on election day, absolutely determined to stop the cult from taking power. The Rajneeshis eventually pulled their candidate from the ballot. In the end, only a handful of Rajneeshpuram residents actually voted, as most weren't even U.S. citizens. At the time of the outbreak, no one immediately knew it was a deliberate attack. Health officials investigated, and the affected salad bars were shut down, costing local restaurants a lot of money. It was only later, after the commune fell apart and people from inside started confessing, that the full, deliberate, and terrifying nature of the bioterror plot came to light. This act marked a chilling escalation. It showed a horrifying willingness within the Rajneeshi leadership to inflict widespread harm on innocent people just to achieve their political goals. The utopian experiment had taken a profoundly dark and criminal turn. That 1984 bioterror attack, as infamous as it is, wasn't the only criminal scheme hatched within Rajneeshpuram's inner circle. As investigations ramped up and the commune started to unravel, a shocking list of other plots and crimes surfaced, mostly linked back to Ma Anand Sheela and her closest cronies. One of the biggest was a massive immigration fraud operation. The Rajneeshis had brought thousands of followers to Oregon from all over the world to help them stay in the U.S. Legally, Sheela's group arranged hundreds of sham marriages between foreign-born sannyasins and American citizens, a clear violation of federal immigration laws. This wasn't just a few fake weddings. It was an industrial-scale operation, allegedly involving over 400 fraudulent marriages. Electronic eavesdropping, wiretapping, was another widespread crime. Sheela's faction set up a sophisticated listening post within Rajneeshpuram, monitoring phone calls and private conversations of anyone they saw as an enemy, critic, or even just a dissenting voice within the commune itself. This created an atmosphere of intense paranoia and control, effectively silencing opposition through fear. The crimes didn't stop there. They escalated to include plots of violence and attempted murder. Sheela and her group were implicated in a plan to assassinate Charles Turner, the U.S. Attorney for Oregon, who was leading the federal investigation into their activities. There were also plots against other public officials and perceived enemies. One instance involved giving poisoned water to 2 Wasco County officials. Another was a poisoned syringe attack on Bhagwan's personal physician, Swami Devaraj, whom Sheela apparently saw as a rival for the guru's attention. Arson was also in their criminal toolkit. In January 1985, the Wasco County Planning Department office was set on fire. This act was clearly meant to destroy records and slow down investigations into the commune's controversial land, use and building projects. The fire caused major damage, wiping out a significant portion of the county's files. These criminal activities were largely directed and carried out by a small, insulated group around Ma Anand Sheela. It seems most of Rajneeshpuram's residents were likely in the dark about the extent of this criminality. Sheela herself became the face of these crimes. Her ambition, her ruthlessness, and her sheer determination to protect and expand the Rajneeshi empire, no matter what, had led her and her inner circle down a dark path of serious felonies. What started as a spiritual movement had morphed into a criminal enterprise. The utopian ideals were now hopelessly stained by a grim reality of bioterrorism, fraud, and attempted murder. By 1985, the elaborate world of Rajneeshpuram was teetering on the edge of total collapse. The sheer weight of criminal investigations, federal, state, and local, was closing in fast. The bioterror attack, the immigration fraud, the wiretapping, the assassination plots, all of it had drawn intense heat from law enforcement, including the FBI. But it wasn't just outside pressure. Internal strife was also tearing them apart. Tensions had been brewing between Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh and his powerful secretary, Ma Anand Sheela. Then, in September 1985, Sheela, along with several members of her inner circle, suddenly bolted from Rajneeshpuram and fled the United States, reportedly after a major fallout with Bhagwan. She eventually landed in West Germany. After she was gone, Bhagwan publicly went on the attack, accusing Sheela and her gang of a whole laundry list of crimes: the bioterror attack, attempted murder, embezzlement, essentially making her the scapegoat for everything illegal the commune had done. He claimed he'd been completely unaware of any of it, kept in the dark by Sheela while he was in a period of public silence. With Sheela out of the picture and evidence of widespread criminality piling up, the authorities made their move. In October 1985, Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh himself was indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of immigration fraud, specifically tied to all those sham marriages. Learning that an arrest was imminent, Bhagwan tried to flee the U.S. He and a small group of followers were nabbed in Charlotte, North Carolina, when their private jets landed to refuel. Bhagwan was brought back to Oregon to face the music. In a plea bargain struck in November 1985, he entered an Alford plea to 2 felony counts of immigration fraud. An Alford plea is a tricky thing. It lets a defendant maintain their innocence but acknowledge that the prosecution has enough evidence to likely get a conviction. As part of the deal, Bhagwan got a 10-year suspended sentence and a hefty fine. But the crucial part? He had to agree to leave the United States and not come back for at least 5 years without the U.S. Attorney General's permission. He was promptly deported and eventually made his way back to India. Ma Anand Sheela and several of her key associates didn't escape either. They were arrested in West Germany and extradited to the United States. Sheela faced a barrage of state and federal charges. In July 1986, she pleaded guilty to charges including attempted murder, assault, masterminding the bioterror attack, wiretapping, and immigration fraud. She was sentenced to concurrent prison terms in federal prison and also fined heavily. She ended up serving 29 months of a longer sentence before being paroled and deported to West Germany. Other members of her crew also got prison time for their roles in the various crimes. With its charismatic leader deported and its top brass either in jail or disgraced, Rajneeshpuram, the utopian city that had shot up so quickly from the Oregon desert, collapsed just as fast. The grand experiment was over. All that was left was a trail of shattered dreams, criminal convictions, and a deeply scarred Oregon community. The fall of Rajneeshpuram was incredibly fast and absolute once Bhagwan was deported and Sheela was arrested. The thousands of sannyasins who had lived in the city, their spiritual leader gone and the commune's leadership in chaos, started to scatter. The vibrant, bustling city, built with so much passion and at such enormous expense, quickly emptied out. The dream of a utopian society in the Oregon desert had evaporated, leaving behind the harsh reality of abandonment and legal fallout. What happened to the massive 64,000-acre, Big Muddy Ranch, the physical home of Rajneeshpuram? It basically became a ghost town full of modern infrastructure. The Rajneesh movement, drowning in debt, couldn't hang on to the property. It was put up for sale in 1985 for over $28 million. A hint at how much money they'd poured into it, but finding a buyer for such a unique and controversial place was tough. Eventually, in 1988, the ranch was sold at a sheriff's auction for a mere $4.5 million to Connecticut General Life Insurance Company, who was the only bidder and likely one of their creditors. For a while, the future of the land was up in the air. Some of the buildings started to fall apart. Then, in 1991, a Montana billionaire named Dennis Washington bought the ranch for $3.65 million. Washington later donated the property to Young Life, a Christian parachurch organization. Young Life transformed the site into a Christian youth camp called the Washington Family Ranch. Many of the original Rajneeshi structures, including buildings and infrastructure, were actually repurposed for the camp. In a strange twist of fate, the land once dedicated to a guru preaching free love and dynamic meditation became a center for Christian youth. Some couldn't help but notice the irony. One communal group with strong beliefs being replaced by another, though with very different ideas and a much less confrontational vibe with its neighbors. The followers of Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh? They scattered all over the globe. Some went back to their home countries, others looked for new spiritual communities, and many had to wrestle with the disillusionment and trauma of what they'd been through. The financial and emotional investment so many had poured into Rajneeshpuram was immense. For some, despite the chaotic ending, the experience still held positive memories of community and spiritual seeking. For others, it was a period of exploitation and manipulation that left deep psychological scars. Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh, after his deportation, eventually returned to his ashram in Pune, India, which was rebranded as the Osho International Meditation Resort. He adopted the name Osho in his later years and kept teaching until his death in January 1990. His teachings actually continue to have a global following. His books and meditation techniques are still popular. The Osho International Foundation now manages his estate and the Pune resort. But the grand, audacious, and ultimately criminal experiment of Rajneeshpuram in Oregon, that remained a stark cautionary tale in the movement's history. For the town of Antelope, the Rajneesh's departure marked the end of an incredibly traumatic and transformative chapter. But the scars and the changes ran deep and proved to be lasting. On November 6, 1985, not long after Bhagwan was deported, the remaining residents of the town formerly known as Rajneesh voted unanimously, 34-0, to change its name back to Antelope. It was a powerful symbolic act, a reclaiming of their identity. But the town they got back wasn't the same one they'd known before the cult arrived. The demographic shift was huge. Many of the original old-timer residents had sold their properties and left during the Rajneesh occupation, driven out by the culture clashes, the political takeover, and the constant atmosphere of intimidation. While some might have eventually returned, the very fabric of the community had been permanently altered. Antelope's population, which had ballooned with Rajneesh's, shrank dramatically again. Today, Antelope is still a very small rural community, with an estimated population hovering somewhere between 37 to 47 people. The psychological impact on the residents who lived through the Rajneesh era was immense. The whole experience bred a deep-seated distrust of outsiders and a heightened sensitivity to issues of local control versus public safety. The memories of political battles, intimidation, and the absolute shock of the bioterror attack lingered for years, shaping local conversations and attitudes. That feeling of having their community invaded and their way of life threatened, that wasn't something people could easily forget. Economically, the impact was a mixed bag. While the Rajneeshis brought a massive injection of money and development to the remote ranch, the town of Antelope itself didn't necessarily see any lasting positive economic boom from that chaotic period. The legal battles and the eventual collapse likely had disruptive economic effects on the wider county as well. However, in the decades since, Antelope has consciously tried to redefine itself. It's now a quiet, historic community. And in a really unique turn, it has become recognized as an international dark sky community, the first in Oregon, promoting its pristine night skies as a treasure for residents and visitors. This initiative feels like a deliberate effort to look to the future and celebrate the town's natural heritage, to move beyond the long shadow of the Rajneesh era. Yet, the legacy of Rajneeshpuram is undeniably a defining part of Antelope's story. It serves as a powerful, real-world case study in cultural conflict, the limits of religious tolerance when public safety is genuinely at risk, and the profound ways a small, isolated community can be violently thrust onto the world stage by extraordinary events. The residents of Antelope learned some hard lessons about vigilance, about community resilience, and about just how fragile their autonomy could be when faced with a determined and well-funded outside force. The town was forever changed, not just in its demographics or its history books, but in its very soul. The whole saga of Rajneeshpuram and its seismic impact on Antelope echoes far beyond the borders of Wasco County, Oregon. It's become a significant and often cautionary tale in American history, one that's studied by sociologists, historians, legal scholars, and anyone interested in religious movements and the dynamics of so-called cults. Nationally, these events threw a harsh spotlight on the incredibly complex dance between religious freedom, which is guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution, and the state's absolute responsibility to maintain public order and safety. The Rajneeshis' initial claims of religious persecution were eventually completely overshadowed by proven criminal activities, including that unprecedented bioterror attack. This forced a serious confrontation over where exactly the boundaries of tolerance lie. The legal battles over land use and the separation of church and state also brought up some critical questions. How can and how should communities respond when large, insular, and unconventional groups decide to set up shop in their midst? The story of Rajneeshpuram became a kind of go-to example in public discussions about cults. While many former sannyasins still resist that label for their time with Bhagwan, the events in Oregon, the charismatic leader, the devoted followers, the isolation, the internal control, and ultimately, the criminal acts committed by the leadership, well, they fit many popular and academic definitions of a destructive cult. The Netflix docuseries Wild Wild Country, released in 2018, brought this incredible story to a whole new generation, reigniting discussions and debates about the true nature of the Rajneesh movement and the actions of its leaders, especially Ma Anand Sheela. The whole episode serves as a stark reminder of the potential dangers of charismatic leadership when it's not checked by accountability and transparency. It really highlights how utopian ideals, when pursued with fanaticism and a complete disregard for existing laws and community rights, can easily spiral into dystopian nightmares. The willingness of a section of the Rajneesh leadership to resort to serious crimes to achieve their aims shows a disturbing extreme of groupthink and the ends justify the means thinking. For Oregon, the Rajneeshpuram affair was a period of profound crisis that truly tested its institutions and its social cohesion. It left an indelible mark on the state's history and its collective memory. The events showed just how vulnerable rural communities can be to sudden, large-scale demographic shifts and the immense challenges of trying to integrate vastly different cultural and religious groups. Today, the story of Rajneeshpuram continues to fascinate and disturb. It's a narrative with so many complex layers, a spiritual quest for thousands, a bold social experiment, a testament to human ingenuity in building a city from practically nothing, and a chilling chronicle of crime and manipulation. It underscores that timeless tension between individual freedom and communal responsibility, and the extraordinary, often unsettling, ways human belief and ambition can reshape the world, even in a quiet corner of Oregon. It's a legacy that ensures this town, and this story, won't be forgotten anytime soon. The rise and fall of Rajneeshpuram is so much more than just a bizarre footnote in American history. It was a flashpoint, a moment where idealism crashed head-on into intolerance, ambition into law, and faith into criminality. In just a few short, explosive years, a spiritual movement from the East tried to carve out its utopia in the American West, and in doing so, it irrevocably altered the lives of its followers and the destiny of a small Oregon town called Antelope. The grand vision of a city built on love and enlightenment, it devolved into a saga of political scheming, bioterrorism, and widespread fear. The leaders were arrested, the guru deported, and the city of Rajneeshpuram dismantled, its land eventually finding a new, very different purpose. Antelope survived. Its name was restored, its residents forever marked by the ordeal. The town now stands as a quiet testament to the resilience of a community that faced a challenge almost beyond imagination. The legacy of those turbulent years serves as a potent reminder that the search for utopia can sometimes lead down some very dark paths, and that even the smallest of towns can find themselves at the very heart of extraordinary, world-changing events. The orange-clad followers may be long gone, but the story of how a mysterious cult changed this Oregon town forever remains a vital and unsettling part of America's complex cultural tapestry. This story is a powerful example of how history can unfold in the most unexpected ways. If you want to see more deep dives into fascinating and impactful events like this one, make sure to hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching, and let us know your biggest takeaway from the Rajneeshpuram story in the comments below.